Can't wait to get started with you to create this awesome abstract painting of a tree. It's kind of a sampler, so we're going to be talking about different techniques. We're going to be talking about tints, shades, and gradients, and mixing some colors together. And in each of these areas that I've marked out are going to be like windows or places where we can try the different techniques. So my goal here is for you to get comfortable with paint, with how to mix it, how to blend it, and how much you should put on. So let's get started. Let's just jump on in. I have some blue, I have some yellow, and then I also have some craft paint. I'm kind of giving you some different options. I'll put all of the links down below. But here I'm using professional quality, a blue and a yellow. And then I put a craft paint in here just so you can see the difference of quality. I think it's really important to talk about why you would choose a different paint over another. And then also some black and some white. So first off, I am just going to start mixing some tints. And when we talk about tints, we are talking about a color mixed with white. It's super easy. You just first, what I do is have a brush. You can use any kind of brush you'd like. I'm just going to be using this round brush throughout the whole entire time. This is an 8, a round 8. And it's a synthetic brush, but it's round because it's a rounded tip and it's round all around the barrel, essentially. This is the ferrule, this is the bristles, but it's all round around. So I find this brush to be pretty versatile. So when I'm starting, I often like to take from the lightest color first, and I plop on some white paint from that. So the lightest color, I'm going to be mixing a blue and a white. Of course, the lightest color will be a white. Let's also talk about the water too. I might come back and come to this water quite often. But I like to use a clear jar so I can see through it. And when I can't see through it anymore, then I know I need to change it. So I'll be changing this out quite a bit throughout my time, but I will also try not to use it too much. The other thing that I will have too is a rag. So I like to dip my paint or my paintbrush into the water and then often wipe it off the excess with a rag. So just an old washcloth, old t-shirt bits, even paper towel works. So I have my white, and now I'm just going to dip a teeny bit into the blue to get a tint and see how light that tint is. I might start with a little bit darker. I want to mix enough that I'm going to be able to paint in one of these, I'm going to call them windows, through my tree branches, essentially. So I'm going to mix in maybe a little bit more white and a little bit more blue until I get a nice tint that I like. I like this blue. It's a nice medium, happy blue. So now I'm just going to find any place where I want and start painting. And don't worry too much about painting in all of getting really tight with the lines. If you paint outside of the lines, that's fine. The great part about this project is we are going to cover it up with Posca paint. Posca pens are a wonderful choice to get acrylic paint onto a surface. I love using them. It's just acrylic paint in a pen. Now, let's talk about how much paint I'm using. I'm not using very much. I'm making a really nice thin layer of paint. And because I'm using professional quality paint, I can add a little bit of water to thin it down a little bit. I'm using professional quality heavy body paint. And heavy body paint is really interesting. If it goes on thick and goopy, it can dry kind of lumpy. So I kind of want it a little bit flatter, so I'm thinning it out. You could also thin it out with medium, quite a bit with medium, and like 40–50%, and still get a really good pigment load. But what I'm looking for is a consistent color, a consistent tint of that blue, and I just painted that. So I'm going to ask you to do that. Let's mix some more tints. I'm going to go a lighter shade this time of that blue, and I'm going to paint it somewhere else. So, and if you wanted it darker, of course you would just add more of the blue color. If you want it lighter, you're just going to add more white. But I want 3 different tints in different places. So we have our first one, maybe the second over here. Let's also talk about what we're painting on. This is a birch panel. Sometimes they're called cradled birch panels because this one has a nice thick cradle. This is the cradle part, but it's made out of birch wood, and birch wood has the lowest acidity, which I absolutely love. So we are able to paint directly onto this board. Now, some people might want to gesso it first, but I don't. If it's acrylic paint, I'm just going directly on it. The other great thing that I love is this is a deep birch panel. These are made here in Salem, Oregon, and it's a great company. American Easel is the name, and we absolutely love this company. The nicest owners ever, and they're all employing local people in a local warehouse in Salem, and they make really great quality and really economic pieces. So we carry this in our shop. But I love these because a couple of things. One, there's no give. You can hear how sturdy this board is. So it's not going to warp. If you want to do encaustics, if you want to do collage, unlike canvas that will kind of warp and divot a little bit, this will not do that. It holds up really great. The other great thing is you could use both sides too. You could use this side to be more like a shadow box side if you wanted to, and you could paint directly onto this side. The other part that I absolutely love is this is framed already for you. With this cradle birch panel, you can put it directly into a gallery and they would accept it. And that is wonderful. I don't have to spend extra money to frame something. And then the other part that I love is it stands up. I can put it here and it will stand up and not tip over. So I can put it on a shelf and not have to put it up on the wall if I don't want to. So I just am in absolute awe of these birch panels. They ship worldwide, but we have them in our shop, and we usually have them at a great discount because they're local and we absolutely love them. So feel free to check those out. Let's see. Now we have 3 tints. I'm going to clean off my brush. We're going, and it's getting kind of dirty. I'm probably going to change that soon. See, I can't see very much through it, but I'm going to now move into the shades essentially. And the shade is the opposite of a tint. A shade is just a color with black mixed in. So I am going to jump to a different color. I'm going to use this American Deco Art paint, Americana. It is a craft paint, and you can see here, you can see the viscosity is not as thick. It's definitely a craft paint, and it comes on a little bit thinner. So I'm going to take a little bit of that and put it in here. And once again, I'm moving from my lightest color first and making a little pile of paint. And I want to get enough of that because I feel like because it's thinner, it doesn't go as far. And then I'm just getting a little bit of black here, just a dab, less than a pea size, maybe like a half a pea size. But that black is so robust, and that's a professional quality, that it will contaminate that that green really quickly. So here I'm getting a nice olive green. I started with, this one's called citron green. It's a nice bright kind of spring green. And so here you can see how dark this has become. That is a shade. Now, why would you make shades? Shades you're going to make because you want shadows, essentially. First, let's figure out where we're going to put this. I'm going to put it maybe down here. So anyway, I'm going to paint that on. And you can notice too, it doesn't go on as quite as thick, which it's a little bit more transparent because it's a craft paint. It has a lot more filler in it. So when you're buying paint, you'll see a big difference of prices. And usually, if a paint is all priced one thing, that means it is either a student quality paint or a craft paint. So if all, like, no matter what color you get, it's all priced the same. That's a cue to tell you they're not quite as great quality as you'd like. When they're priced differently, though, that means that you're paying for the pigment and less of the filler. And so a cadmium is going to be probably one of the more expensive, or a cobalt is going to be one of the more expensive pigments. So you'll pay more for a tube of that. But like an Azo yellow, for instance, that's going to be a lot cheaper typically. But the cost difference is that you're paying for that robust pigment. And when I'm saying the pigment, it means that it's not as many additives into it. It has great mixing ability. It is really awesome. Let's see. So there is one shade. I might add some more going in and not cleaning my brush. Just add what's already on there and see if I can get a lighter shade of that. I'm going to paint 3 different shades, and I'm kind of being strategic of putting these down in different areas. So you're not going to see all the shades in one place, all the tints and all the gradients, where we're kind of mixing it up. So maybe I'm going to paint it up here. So let's talk more about pigments. Why would you choose a professional quality over a non-professional quality? For instance, you might have issues mixing. If you have issues mixing mixing paint and it's somewhat muddy, that might tell you that perhaps you might want to get a nicer paint, a more expensive professional quality paint. Typically, the more filler and more additives that are into that paint, the harder it is to mix, as well as the pigments may not be as nice as you'd like them to be. Also, another way, I'm going to keep going lighter, I think. I kind of like that. So I'm going to, still with that paint that I had, I'm just going to make it one bit lighter. And I'm going to go somewhere else, maybe over here. So the other reason why you might want a professional quality paint is the coverage. I'm noticing here this is a lot thinner, so I might need more coats to get more coverage, essentially. And so if I only want to paint something one time and have a really good pigment load, I will pick a professional quality paint. Another reason would be the light fastness. And usually light fastness is, when people are talking about that, they're talking about the UV rays of the sun, and that can sometimes discolor pigments. And so usually with higher quality paints, not usually, with higher quality paints, they are always testing. Golden, for instance, is a really great product, Golden paint, and they test all the time for their light fastness, because you don't want to paint something and then 6 months later it looks completely different than what you painted. So those are reasons why I always paint with professional quality. But here I wanted to give you an example of what you can do, and you can still use it, the craft paints or the student quality. It just may not be exactly what you're looking for. So be really thoughtful when you're picking your paint to make sure you're getting what you want. Because especially when you're starting out, it might be really hard to figure out what you want, and you might get really frustrated with the lower quality. So now we have 3 different shades, and now we have 3 different tints. Let's move on to gradients. So I'm going to pause and just refill my water. I'll come right back. Okay, water is now clear. I can see through it again, and that's ideal. So, especially when you're mixing colors, you're going to want to change your water quite frequently. You could even have a couple jars and switch them out when you're painting if you don't want to keep getting up and down. So, with gradients, what we're talking about is a blending, a transition between 2 colors, essentially. So I'm going to start here. I think this is a great place to show you of how I would do that. So I'm going to take 2 contrasting colors. I have white, which is down here, and blue, and I'm going to show you how I would make a gradient. Now, usually this is the trickier of these techniques. We're just talking about the tints, the shades, and the gradients. And it's because the blending can be somewhat tricky. But once you master this, you can do it anywhere. So I put quite a bit of white on my paint or paintbrush, and I'm going to thin it out, essentially, this white. And I'm going to go in the corner. I'm going to make this white in the corner, and then make it a gradient towards the middle, essentially, and then go back to white again. So first I'm going to get a nice layer of white. And when I'm doing my white, I'm not making it goopy. I'm making it quite thin. Now, with my white still on my brush, I'm not even going to clean it. I am going to go into this blue and get maybe somewhat of a pea size, I think, and put that down right smack dab in the middle. Now, I'm going to start moving this just little by little. You're just patting it, essentially, and moving this blue into the white, leaving the darker blue in the middle. See what we're doing? We're just doing a nice blending essentially. Now, I'm at a point that I almost have too much paint on my brush. So I'm going to come to my rag and just wipe it off. Now with a dry brush, this is what we call a dry brush technique. I'm going to come back in where the blue was touching the white and start petting that into it a little bit more. So you can see this is a really fine feathering. It's a dance back and forth. Add more blue, or add more blue into the white, add more white into the blue. And I'm just going back and forth. I don't want to see my brush strokes. That is the idea here. So when you would paint these things, typically this blending of the gradients of the two paints, you do this all the time when you paint. Oh, okay, and now I have too much white on it, so I'm going to wash off that white. That white can easily just ruin any other color. It just is so mighty. So I now have a clean brush and I'm going to go back into the blue. So what I was saying before is you use this technique a lot in painting. So say you want to do something circular, you might, you wouldn't go up and down like we're doing here, but I would go in a different direction, like a circular motion, and following the plane of a vase. For instance, if we're painting a vase as the shape of that and the blending, I would do that. But this blending technique, if you can get it down for painting, you can use it pretty much wherever. If you were doing skin tones, you might want to do blending, things like that. So I have a pretty good, right now you can see very different kind of colors there. You can see almost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different values, different darknesses of this color. So I'm going to come back and blend it even more in between the two after I've just washed my paint. Great. Wash off again. And this time, instead of using the tip of my brush, I'm going to see what happens when I just go and use the side of my brush. But here you can see I'm getting great methods of blending. It's blending quite lovely. Now I'm going to go to the other side and do the same thing, except in the opposite direction. I'm going to add that white, go in the corner. And this typically is the hardest one that everybody has somewhat of a challenge over. But gosh, when you get it, you can be a brilliant painter. It's just a skill that you build up. A lot of people feel like painting is something that they just can't do. And I think you can. I think anybody can be a painter if you spend enough time building up your skills. So now, once again, I have too much white. I might even give some of that back to my palette. I'm going to wash this off because that white can contaminate. I don't want to do that. I think there's enough blue that I'm going to see if I could start pulling. Let's see if it's dried yet. It's not yet, so that's great. I can start pulling some of that blue down. I love that I'm mixing it right here on the board. I don't have to use my palette. That's the other great thing. This is not like paper. If you were doing this on paper, you would have a really difficult time. Oh, I see a hair. Do you see hairs? For some reason I'm really shedding. Maybe this is my cat hair. You could just pull it off. But if this was paper, you would have a really hard time blending, because you'd probably blend so much that you're kind of digging at the paper. With this wood, it's so mighty that I am not feeling like I'm going to ruin the board by any means. I see this hard transition. I just wipe my brush completely. I'm going back in to blend these two together. That is the nice thing about the birch. You can really work on this quite a long time. Once again, wiping. This time I'm going to go into the blue. Come at it from the other direction. See how I'm just doing this dance back and forth. Work on the white, work on the blue, work on the white, work on the blue. And then I'm going to blend it out. Dry brush, blend it out. See how good and smooth you can make yours. I'm not going to spend forever making mine super smooth, but I want you to see what's happening. Pretty good. It's hard to see on the camera, but I bet you can make yours really good. And then if you wanted it even more blue in the middle, you can come back and add some more blue. if you want. It's up to you. Whatever you want. This also becomes yours. Like maybe you do want to see those changes, but it's kind of like an ombre. I'm gonna get a little of this blue off. An ombre effect to have these nice blending colors. Almost feels like it's moving too, like it's changing somehow. This would be really great if you're working on slime or something like that, that just really shows a change or a drip or something like that. Perfect. So now I'm going to have you work on 2 more. How about, so we've done this one, maybe we do this one, and maybe we do, let's see, this one, and maybe we do one up here. Let's see. Okay, so now you have your gradients. If you're having a hard time with your gradients, I think you should keep trying those out. And you still have plenty of places to fill up different colors. I'm just going to now take my time and fill up all these colors little by little. I'm thinking when I'm filling these up, I'm not putting similar colors next to each other. And I'm also thinking of value. And when I talk about value, it's easy sometimes to see value a little bit. If you squint your eyes, you could see really darks and really lights and everything in between. So that's what I mean by value. So for instance, this middle part is a much darker value than this white. So I would say these are the 2 extremes I have right now. I might make an even darker value, a base value with the black and the blue, making a nice navy down here. That would be really nice, and that would stabilize my painting, putting it towards the bottom. So I want to see a lot of different values. I want to see the colors kind of spread out a little bit. So that's what I'm going for. And then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, this is the last color that I need to paint of the blue and the yellow and the green on my board. The one thing I will also say, the harder it is, the more you fill this in and the more the paint's wet, to find a place for your hand to get steady. So I like to usually paint as much as I can, because I'm right-handed, from left to right, so I can have a place for my hand to still be stable and paint and get kind of somewhat of a smooth stroke. I find that helpful. Now, if you painted yourself in a corner, the other thing you can do is rest your elbow on like a chair arm. That can also really help give you some stability. But trying to get as stable as possible painting is always a tip, especially if you find yourself a little shaky, that maybe your lines aren't as crisp as you'd like them to be, then really plant that arm somewhere, either your elbow. Some people even do pinkies while they're painting. They can do that too. But find something. Think of it kind of like a tripod. Just, it's really easy to make wonky lines when you don't have any stability behind that. So I'm just going to continue making this big swatch of color. But how are you feeling? I hope you're feeling really good about yours so far. I hope you have lots of different gradients, lots of different tints, lots of different shades in there. And also, what I find is interesting is how people can choose the same darn colors and get very different styles. So I hope yours actually looks nothing like mine and looks exactly the way you want it to look. That's the whole important part about art, is making it the way you want it to look. The other thing we didn't talk about was transparency very much versus opacity. The other thing that's really awesome when you get really great quality paints is, for instance, you get exactly what you want. A lot of them will show you exactly like how transparent it is, and it will also list how transparent it is. So when I say transparent versus opaque, opaque means you can't see through it at all. And transparent means you can. So for instance, today we're using a white, we're using a titanium white, and titanium is known for its opacity. It is the best white when you want to add highlights, for instance, because you don't see through it. So choosing the right paint too that has the right opacity is super important. So there you're learning a lot of words today. Opacity, transparency, you're learning tint, you're learning shade, and you're learning gradients. And you're doing a great job. So is done. Now, at this point, I like to let it dry if I can. And if you don't want to, that's completely fine too. I know I need to clean my water, so I'm going to go do that. And then we'll move on to the next step. Great. Now, I didn't let it dry, but you know what? It's kind of dry. I can see most of it's dry. So we'll see. We're kind of going fast and furious today. So I have white on my palette. I have black on my palette. I am going to make these branches white and gray, essentially. So I'm thinking the sun might be over here on the left side, and everything on the right would be a little bit grayer. And then also, if you notice, we have these crossover branches. You get to make some choices here about, I don't know, hopefully you could have seen that. Does this branch cross over this branch? We'll see. We'll see what happens. So you get to make those choices. So now's the time to make that. And so right now, I'm just going to mix a little bit of gray. This is quite a dark gray. Let's see. I'm going to go for a lighter gray, I think. So I want some of these branches to kind of be in the background. And the smaller branches. So like, let's see, I might make this branch up in the background. Now, once again, we're not too worried about making these lines perfect because we're going to come in with our handy Posca pen. Posca to the rescue. So some of these I'm going to make a little bit more gray, these branches, and then some of them I'm going to make white. More gray on the right, I said. So I'm going to keep following my rule. And if you don't, maybe you want to make it a whole different color. You could totally choose to do that. I'm just showing you what I like and what my choice was. Also, the great thing about these paints is a lot of them are really opaque. And you can go over the color. Say you did not like that color. Say, ooh, I don't like how light this is. I'm going to make a different color. You can even go to dark and add white to it. It's a little bit harder usually, but because these are such great paints, you can absolutely do that. So I love that. I love that acrylic dries really fast and also is a great way to change things quickly. So here I've already started getting some of those branches down. I'm going to mix a little bit lighter color, and now I'm going to do the branch that would have been over top that gray. So this already gives me depth right here. I'm seeing that this is going to be the front and this is going to be the back. Okay, so I didn't like how light this was, and so we talked about the light source coming from the left, and that means it's going to be brighter on the left and darker on the right. So all I did was took my brush in some gray and I went alongside the white area that I didn't like, and automatically that pops this out a little bit and adds a little bit of depth. And what's great about that is you've already learned that through shading, which means just adding black, you can make things look a little bit a little bit rounded and more in the background, which is super cool. So I can add even more gray if I really wanted to. Depends on how detailed you want to get, but I can add more gray to make that look a little bit more 3D. So pretty much, because you know tints and you know shading, you can make things look really 3D super easy. If I want things to be a little bit more detailed, I can add some highlights, which is through the tint, and then I can add the shades. I'm going to keep doing this until I am completely done filling in the trees, and then I'll show you the next step. All right, I have now painted all the tree limbs. You can see I've gotten kind of dark in some of these shading areas, but soon we're going to paint with Poscas, and so don't worry about if there's like little edges that are showing. It doesn't all have to be butted up to each other and super smooth. Your Posca pen is going to take care of all of that. So it's going to be great. But we are going to let this dry, because what happens is, especially if you paint a little bit thicker, you might find some little blobs there, and that's going to take some time to dry. It might even appear to be dry on the outside, but not dry on the inside. So the harder you hold your Posca pen, you can get some wet paint, and we don't want to ruin the tip of our Posca. So just let this dry completely. now's a good time. You're not going to use probably your palette anymore. This is palette paper that I like to use. You can easily just fold this up and get rid of it, or paint something else if you want with it. But I'm definitely going to take some time to also clean my really kind of gross water. You can see that here. And then clean my brush. I'm going to take care to really get in this area where the brushes or the bristles touch the ferrule, because that's usually where the paint likes to stay. And if you clean these brushes really well, they'll last you for a long time. So I'm going to go take care of that before anything dries on my paintbrush. Take care of my palette, clean it up, get ready, and I'll see you soon. Okay, my piece is pretty dry. Now I'm going to work with my Posca pen. I absolutely love Poscas. They're nice and opaque. They're really lovely range of colors, and they're a really easy way to lay down paint. And I'm actually going to go and move this a little bit. I'm going to move from the left to the right. And essentially I'm just placing down paint. If yours hasn't gotten started, I know mine's already been started because it's black, but if you're just getting started, you'll have a white tip, and you'll just go and on paper, you'll do a pounce method until you see paint coming down this white tip essentially. And then you know it's ready to be used when it's completely black and saturated on the tip. So I'm easily just going to come in and just trace. Now, we talked about having a pivot point or a place for your hand to rest essentially. I am doing that on my desk right now. And I am just coming in and I'm looking from the top down and coming in and tracing these branches on either side. Now, I've already started at a place that I need to make a decision. So it looks like this is the darker branch behind and the lighter branch is on top. So I am going to make sure that I'm covering that correctly. I am not going to cut off my tree essentially. So that means I have a parallel line. These two lines are running on either side of this tree branch, which is great. And if I didn't do that and crossed it weird, it would look kind of like a mistake. And so I try to not do that. So I'm just going to, throughout this painting, I'm just going to cover it all with my Poscas, and then we'll go to the next step. You could also, just point it out, you could finish it now. And I have a plethora of Poscas over here that I'm going to go through and use, as well as my polychromos that I absolutely love, my favorite colored pencils, just to add a little bit more whimsy to it. But you could totally pause it and stop it and only do the black outline. Okay, I've used my Posca, and as you can see, all the lines are now covered. All the branches are on either side. There's a black line. The other thing that I like to do, let me show you these other examples that I have, is use other Posca colors as well as the polychromos to get some really cool depth of color. So with this one, I'm going to do the same. So you don't have to do this, but it's an extra step to add an extra bit of whimsy. The other thing that we're doing is we can add some fun, whimsical little lines and dots and just, you know, add a little bit more interest to those windows, those color placements. So let's do that right now. And I like to choose colors that kind of go along with the background essentially. And then also colors that in the tree, I like to pick colors like oranges and yellows and corals because I think those look really good mixed with some blues too for the cool sides to make it look a little bit more, I don't know, whimsical, fun, maybe some teal. Yeah, so let me show you just quickly what that would look like. So starting with this trunk, I might add some orange. It's going to be nice and bright on that side. We talked about that sun maybe being on the left-hand side. So adding some lines to the trunk is kind of fun. And then maybe that looks a little harsh, so I can go and add some yellow. I also like to keep a piece of paper next to us, or to me while I'm doing this, so I can get more juice to come out. These Poscas can get really dry, and so I might want to do that. This is starting to look cool. And see how it just really pops the side out. And then also maybe some pinks. Once again, it's a little dry. This is a nice coral color that I really like. Maybe something like this. And just, you know, it adds a little bit more interest. It's not as flat, which is really lovely. And maybe just for interest, I'll add it to this one. I'm mostly doing it to the branches that would be in the foreground, not necessarily so much in the back. Great. So that's starting to look really cool. Now, the other thing that I can do is with your color pencils. These are the Polychromos by Faber-Castell that I love, but blues do a really good job of receding. And so putting that in the areas that would be darker looks really cool. I might also add some over the Posca just to give it a little bit more depth over there so it doesn't look so harsh. So you can see easily I could build up colors doing that. And so I'll just keep doing that essentially until I get it to a part that I like. And then with these Poscas over here, I can add these to these areas. So already I see here I had a little drop of white. So I might put some polka dots in. I'm gonna make sure my pen's juicy. And just quickly add polka dots. And it becomes really fun, really whimsical, and just gives that pop of interest where you wouldn't necessarily expect it. Okay, and here it is done. You can see that I added the Poscas to the edges, added some cool designs in the back, but there it is, completely done.